Ancient China, located in East Asia, has long been one of the most important places on Earth where new knowledge and technology emerged. While Europe was still in the Middle Ages, Chinese scientists and craftsmen were making discoveries that were hundreds, sometimes thousands, of years ahead of their time. Many of these inventions not only changed life in China itself, but also, thanks to trade routes like the Silk Road, influenced the development of all mankind. They became the basis for modern technology, changed warfare, helped spread knowledge, improved trade, and the exploration of new lands. Today, we will look at 6 of the most important inventions from ancient China that forever changed the history of the entire world. And the first such invention was paper. Its appearance was probably one of the most important and fundamental inventions in the history of mankind. Before paper, very inconvenient, expensive, and heavy materials were used for writing, which greatly slowed down development and limited access to knowledge. In China, before paper, they wrote on bamboo planks. They were heavy, bulky, and difficult to store and carry. One book of such planks could weigh several dozen kilograms. They also wrote on silk. This material was much lighter and more convenient, but it was very expensive, so only the imperial family and the richest people used it. They also used clay tablets and like in the Middle East, but in China they were used less often for permanent records. And of course wooden tablets, and they are similar to bamboo, but could be a little lighter. This limited access to education, science, and governance of the country to only a small group of the chosen ones. Society was in dire need of a new, cheaper, and more convenient material for recording information. Let's look at the history of the development of this material. In fact, it is generally believed that improved paper was invented by Cai Lun, an important official at the court of the Eastern Han Dynasty. According to ancient records, in the year 105 of our era, he presented a report to Emperor A.D. on a new writing material. This material was much better than all the previous ones. Cai Lun received high recognition and praise for this. This suggests that simple forms of paper may have existed in China before Cai Lun. But it was he who made the process of paper making understandable, standardized, and greatly improved it, making paper economically viable, efficient, and accessible to all. His contribution was to find the best raw material composition and process that allowed high-quality paper to be produced in large quantities. And the raw materials that Cai Lun proposed for paper were varied, easy to obtain, and most importantly, cheap. For example, the bark of the mulberry tree was used. It is rich in long and strong fibers. Hemp scraps are fibers that were obtained from hemp stems, also known for their strength. Sometimes they took scraps of old fabric, basically worn-out cotton and linen rags that would otherwise just be thrown away. And fishing nets were a source of durable fibers that could be recycled. The manufacturing process that Cai Lun developed involved several important steps. These steps became the basis for papermaking for many hundreds of years. And the first such step was grinding and soaking the raw materials. First, the raw materials were ground very finely and soaked in water for a long time so that the fibers became soft. Next, the soaked raw materials were boiled with the addition of alkaline substances, such as ash, to finally separate the fibers and clean them of excess. The resulting mass was thoroughly ground and mixed until it became a homogeneous fibrous gruel. Wooden mortars and pestles, and later water mills, could be used for this, and the fibrous gruel was poured onto a special fine mesh net stretched over a frame, which was usually made of bamboo fibers or silk. The net was carefully lifted, allowing the water to drain through, leaving a thin layer of interwoven fibers on the surface. The already formed sheets were then carefully removed from the net and dried in the sun or on special heated surfaces. And finally, to improve quality, paper could be further processed, for example, sizing with starch, rice flour, or gelatin, so that it absorbed less ink and was smooth. Ultimately, this process made paper production much more efficient and cheaper than silk or parchment, which helped it spread rapidly throughout the Chinese Empire. Cai Lun's name is firmly associated with the invention of paper, and his methods became the basis for all subsequent developments in papermaking. It is known that the invention of paper was a powerful impetus for the spread of literacy, education, and culture in China and beyond. Knowledge that had previously been limited by expensive and inconvenient materials could now be recorded, copied, and distributed much more easily and cheaply. This led to an unprecedented flourishing of science, philosophy, literature, poetry, art, and the study of history in China. Thus, the advent of paper helped expand the country's governance system. Public administration became much more efficient because it was easy to keep records, reports, and store archives. A huge number of official papers, laws, and orders could be easily printed and distributed. Also increased significantly, making it possible to create large libraries. It became possible to print textbooks and materials for imperial examinations, making access to government positions more open to everyone. And a huge number of new literary works, philosophical works, encyclopedias, medical manuals, and agricultural manuals appeared, which contributed to the development of society in all areas. Paper was the ideal material for beautiful writing called calligraphy and painting. But over time, paper-making technology spread beyond China. First, it came to neighboring countries such as Korea, Japan, and Vietnam, but then, via the Silk Road, the secret of paper began to penetrate to the West. A significant moment came in 751 ADE, when, after the Battle of Talas between Chinese troops and the Arab Caliphate, the Arabs captured Chinese papermakers. These papermakers were taken to Samarkand, where they founded the first paper mills outside China. From there, papermaking spread throughout the Islamic world, to Baghdad in 793, Damascus, Cairo, Fez, and then to Spain where the Moors lived. Thus, the Arab papermakers not only adopted the technology, but also improved it, using flax and cotton as raw materials and introducing water mills to grind the pulp, which greatly increased the production and quality of paper. Later, from the Islamic world, via North Africa and Spain, paper came to Europe in the 12th century. The first paper mills in Europe appeared in Spain and Italy. Its arrival in Europe in the 15th century coincided with the invention of printing by Johann Gutenberg. It was a perfect match. Cheap and accessible paper became the perfect material for the mass production of printed books. Without accessible and relatively inexpensive paper, it would not have been possible to create as many printed books as were made possible by Gutenberg's printing presses. The printing press and paper led to a true information revolution, accelerating the Reformation, the scientific revolution, and the Age of Enlightenment, as knowledge became available to large numbers of people. B. It is worth remembering that the alphabet became the basis for the development of journalism, news dissemination, maps, financial documents, works of art, and government. It forever changed the way information is stored and transmitted. It made it possible to standardize texts, reduce the number of errors in copying, and significantly increase the speed of dissemination of new ideas, which was very important for the development of modern civilization. Today, despite the development of digital technologies and electronic devices for storing information, paper remains an important part of our lives. From books, newspapers, and magazines to office documents, banknotes, packaging, hygiene products, and even some building materials, paper continues to play a major role in everyday life and industry. Therefore, her invention became one of the most important steps of humanity towards a modern information society and the development of literacy. Well, we move on to the next invention, namely the compass, because before his inventions, sailors and travelers were severely limited in their options. They relied on the sun during the day, the stars at night if the sky was clear, and natural landmarks such as coastlines, prominent mountains, currents, and wind. This made long sea voyages very risky, especially in bad weather, fog, or when the coastline was not visible. Traveling across deserts or steppes was also very difficult without a reliable way to determine direction. Therefore, there was a clear need for a versatile and reliable navigation tool. But you may ask me how exactly the compass was invented, and I will tell you that this is exactly what we are going to look at now. The earliest versions of the compass appeared in China during the Han Dynasty, which is from 206 BC to 220 AD. These early devices, known as Zinanzhe, which means south-pointing, were made using the properties of lodestone, a stone that is itself a magnet. The Zinan was a very polished spoon or ladle carved from a single piece of lodestone. This magnetic spoon was placed on a smooth bronze plate on which were painted the cardinal directions, namely north, south, west, east, and the intermediate directions, and the signs of the zodiac that were used in Chinese space science. And because it was magnetic and rotated freely on a smooth surface, the spoon always stopped with its handle pointing south. because the magnetic south pole of the Earth is located in the same place as the geographic North Pole. But I want to say that at first, Jinan was not used to find the way on a journey, but for feng shui, an ancient Chinese practice that helped to determine a good place to build buildings, burials, and other objects so that they would be in harmony with nature. It helped to find the right direction for construction or rituals. But later, during the Song dynasty from 960 to 1279, the Chinese greatly improved the compass and began to actively use it for navigation. During this period, new ways of creating magnetic needles were discovered and explored. For example, they magnetized metal needles by rubbing them with a piece of magnetite, or by heating them strongly and quickly cooling them in the north-south direction. And the first compasses for ships were thin magnetized needles that floated freely in a bowl of water on a piece of wood or cork. The water reduced friction, allowing the needle to easily turn along the Earth's magnetic field. A little later, a more convenient and stable option appeared: a dry compass. In it, a magnetized needle was attached to the tip inside a small box. This made the compass more practical for use on a rocking ship or in the field, protecting the needle from wind and water. It is known that the Chinese scientist Shen Kuo, in his famous book, Notes on the Pool of Dreams, described in detail the magnetic declination, that is, the deviation of the magnetic needle from the true geographic north. This shows us that the Chinese deeply understood the principles of magnetism and were able to accurately observe the movement of the stars and the Earth. He also described how the compass is used for travel, and already by the end of the 11th, beginning of the 12th century, Chinese sailors actively used compasses for travel on the open sea. This allowed their ships to sail much longer distances without fear of getting lost, and to plot precise routes even in conditions of poor visibility, such as at night in fog or storms, or in the open ocean, where there were no noticeable landmarks. This is how the use of the compass, together with accurate maps and observations of the stars, made the Chinese Navy the most advanced in the world at that time. But it is worth saying that the invention of the compass completely changed navigation and world trade. It allowed ships to sail much longer distances from the shore without fear of getting lost, and to plot precise courses even in bad weather or at night. This led to an unprecedented development of maritime trade, expansion of territories, and exploration of new lands. The compass also helped to open new sea routes and facilitate travel between continents. Various Chinese sailors, such as the great Admiral Zheng He, made huge maritime expeditions to Southeast Asia, India, Arabia, and even East Africa in the early 15th century. His fleets consisted of hundreds of huge vessels, some of which, the so-called treasure ships, were much larger than the European ships of the time, up to 130 meters in length. It was these voyages, made decades before Christopher Columbus and Vasco da Gama, that demonstrated the outstanding navigational skills of the Chinese, who used the compass, star navigation, and detailed maps. They sailed as far as the coast of Kenya, collected tribute from many states, and established extensive trade relations. Over time, when the compass reached Europe, it played a key role in the navigation of European explorers during the famous Age of Discovery. Sailors such as Christopher Columbus, Ferdinand Magellan, and Vasco da Gama relied on the compass to guide them across the oceans. Without the compass, such monumental undertakings as the discovery of America, the sea route to India around Africa, and the first circumnavigation of the globe would have been much more difficult or even impossible. And so the compass allowed European countries to explore new lands, establish trade links around the world, and eventually create colonial empires that completely changed world politics and economics. I want to say that in addition to marine navigation, the compass became an indispensable tool for cartographers, helping to accurately plot geographic objects and directions on maps. It was also used by surveyors. These are people who take measurements of a given area and process them, for land surveying and construction, and in mining to determine the location of ore veins. In general, the compass still remains the main navigational tool for tourists, geologists, the military, and many other professions. Modern navigation systems such as GPS, although using satellites rather than the Earth's magnetic field, continue to serve the same basic purpose of providing accurate orientation in space, which was first done thousands of years ago with a simple magnetic compass. The next major discovery was gunpowder. It forever changed the nature of warfare, making it longer-ranged, more mechanized, and more deadly, and helped develop many other technologies that impacted everyday life and industry. This invention was the turning point that led to the end of the age of bladed weapons using swords and spears, and the beginning of the firearms era. We know that gunpowder was accidentally discovered by Taoist alchemists in China in the 9th century during the Tang dynasty. They were diligently searching in their laboratories for the elixir of immortality, a magical substance that they believed could grant eternal life or youth. In their experiments, they mixed different minerals and substances, trying to find new compounds and reactions. I can say that at that time, the main components of gunpowder were: saltpeter is a substance that promotes rapid combustion and releases oxygen. Sulfur is a highly flammable substance that lowers the temperature at which the mixture ignites. And charcoal is the source of carbon that serves as the fuel for the reaction. Soon the alchemists discovered that the mixture they obtained, when mixed in certain proportions and conditions, ignited very easily, burned very quickly, and released a lot of gases, which led to an explosion. The earliest mention of gunpowder is in a book called The True Principles of the Preparation of Elixirs of Fire. It describes precautions when working with gunpowder because of its explosive properties, and warns alchemists about the great danger of mixing certain substances. One of the texts of that time says that some alchemists heated sulfur and saltpeter together with honey. The smoke and flames were so strong that their hands and faces were burned, and even the whole house burned down. This clearly indicates that gunpowder had already been discovered by that time. But gunpowder was first used in China to create fireworks and signal flares, which was a rather peaceful but impressive use. It was used in festivals, ceremonies, to create beautiful light and sound effects, and to send signals over long distances, for example in the army, to coordinate actions or warn of an approaching enemy. But it soon became clear that it could be used as a powerful military weapon. Already, in the 10th century, the Chinese began to actively use gunpowder for military purposes. The first types of gunpowder weapons were quite simple, and were used to create noise, smoke, fire, and to intimidate the enemy, as well as to set fire. For example, such a weapon was the fire arrows. These were arrows that had small charges of gunpowder attached to them. When they hit, they could cause fires and greatly frighten the enemy. There were also fire spears, bamboo or metal tubes filled with gunpowder mixed with small stones or fragments. They threw flames and fragments over a short distance and were the precursors of handheld firearms. And of course they made fireballs. These were primitive bombs filled with gunpowder, sometimes with the addition of resin, sulfur, arsenic, or poisonous substances. These balls were thrown by catapults or lowered down the walls of fortresses, causing fires and panic. But a little later already, during the dynasty, the development of gunpowder weapons reached its peak. In 1132, the first fire tubes were described. This is an early form of cannon, which were hollow tubes capable of firing projectiles. In 1259, the Chinese invented the fire lance, a metal tube that fired projectiles, effectively making it the world's first handheld firearm. And by the end of the 13th century, the Chinese were already widely using metal cannons, cast from bronze or iron, that fired stone or metal projectiles. This greatly increased the destructive power of the weapon. Chinese military books, such as Wujing Zongyao, a collection of the most important military methods, described in detail various gunpowder recipes and methods of its military use. But it is worth saying that the spread of gunpowder from China around the world occurred gradually, most likely along several routes through the Great Silk Road. There are different opinions about how gunpowder came to the West. One such assumption was that it came through the Mongols. They say that the Mongol Empire, which created a huge state in Eurasia in the 13th century, had close ties with China and actively used gunpowder weapons in its conquests. During the Mongol invasions of Persia, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe, gunpowder technology may have been transferred. Also believed that it was transmitted through Arab traders and scholars. Indeed, the Arab world had extensive trade and cultural ties with China. Alchemists and scholars could have learned about gunpowder and its production in Asia, and then brought this knowledge to the Middle East. From there, gunpowder came to Europe. But there is an opinion that merchants and travelers could have brought knowledge of gunpowder and its recipes from China through India to Europe. Already by the 13th and 14th centuries, gunpowder and the technology for its use had reached the Middle East and Europe. In Europe, gunpowder caused a real military revolution. The advent of artillery and firearms made medieval castles and knightly cavalry obsolete. Powerful cannons could penetrate thick walls, and handheld firearms allowed ordinary infantry soldiers to mortally wound even knights in heavy armor. This dramatically changed the tactics of battle, required new ways of organizing armies, and led to the strengthening of central authority. Because only strong states could afford to produce, maintain, and train armies equipped with artillery and firearms, soon became a key factor in changing the political map of Europe, facilitating the emergence of nation-states, professional armies, and colonial expansion. European countries used their superiority in firearms to subjugate peoples on other continents and create global empires. Therefore, with the advent of firearms, battles became larger, bloodier, and required much greater support in terms of supplies. But it is worth saying that in addition to military applications, gunpowder also found peaceful uses. It was used in the mining industry for blasting operations, which greatly facilitated the extraction of minerals such as coal and ore, the construction of tunnels, for example, when laying roads, canals, and railways, and the development of quarries. This led to an increase in industrial production and facilitated large engineering projects. The development of gunpowder also stimulated progress in metallurgy and mechanical engineering, since the production of firearms required new, stronger, and lighter alloys, as well as precise metalworking methods. Although the destructive power of gunpowder is obvious, and it has also caused countless deaths and destruction throughout human history, its invention still played a decisive role in shaping the modern world, changing the balance of power, accelerating the development of technology, and profoundly influencing the course of human history. For this reason, this invention is a shining example of how even an accidental discovery can lead to huge changes in all aspects of society. And we will move on and consider the fourth invention, which was printing. Before this, books were copied by hand, which was very slow, required enormous effort and time from specially trained people, namely scribes, and made books very expensive and rare. In addition, with each copying, errors and distortions of the text inevitably appeared, which led to a loss of accuracy. The lack of identical and accessible copies slowed down the spread of ideas, scientific discoveries, religious texts, and government orders. Therefore, there is a clear and urgent need for a fast and accurate way to copy texts. We know that the earliest forms of printing in China appeared long before the European invention of Gutenberg. The Chinese invented woodblock printing, which is printing from wooden boards, during the Tang dynasty. This method worked in a special way, and I propose to consider it in more detail. First, the board was prepared. All text on the page and images were very carefully cut out, on a wooden board, usually made of pear or fig wood, in a mirror-like manner. This required a very high level of skill on the part of the carver, and was a very labor-intensive process, especially for complex hieroglyphs. After this, ink was applied. The entire surface of the carved board was covered with ink. Further, a sheet of paper was placed on the ink board and carefully pressed or rubbed with a special roller to obtain an even imprint. And finally, the sheet was carefully removed, leaving an image on it. We have found the oldest surviving woodblock printed book, the Diamond Sutra, a Buddhist text dating back to 868. Found in the Mogao Caves in Dunhuang, this scroll is an outstanding example of ancient printing, showing very high quality and precision. It is worth mentioning that the real revolution in printing was made by Bi Sheng in the 11th century, when he invented movable type during the Song dynasty. His invention solved the problem of the labor-intensive nature of woodblock printing. He used clay letters. Each individual character was carved on a small piece of clay, which was then fired at a low temperature to become durable. These letters were then assembled into special molds for printing the page. The mold was an iron frame filled with a mixture of resin, wax, and paper ash. The letters were pressed into this mixture, creating a flat surface for printing. After printing was finished, the letters were taken apart, cleaned and stored in special boxes by category so that they could be used again. Later, in 1298, the scholar Wang Zhen developed a more advanced system of wooden movable type, describing it in his book, Nong Shu. He also invented rotating shelves for storing type to find them faster. And in Korea in the 13th century, and then in China, they began to use metal movable type made of bronze and later tin. Metal type was more durable, allowed for a clearer impression, and could withstand a greater number of copies. Although the movable type system in China was more difficult to use due to the huge number of characters, because the Chinese language has tens of thousands of unique characters, making it much more difficult to sort and assemble characters than European alphabets, which have only a few dozen letters, it nevertheless significantly sped up the printing process and made it more flexible. The Chinese printed huge encyclopedias, extensive historical works, classical, philosophical and literary works, and agricultural and medical manuals. The great spread of printed books contributed to the development of science, public service, and general education of the population. Thus, the technology of printing, although not in exactly the same form, most likely spread and to the West. Perhaps the Mongols, who interacted closely with China and actively used printed documents in their administration, brought this idea to Persia and the Middle East. From there, the knowledge could have reached Europe. There is also an opinion about parallel development or independent invention. However, Chinese methods were much earlier and more advanced for their time. It is also worth noting that the invention of printing, both Chinese and European, led to an unprecedented information revolution, comparable to the emergence of the Internet today. It made books accessible to the general population, which meant that more people could learn to read and access texts, which contributed to the development of education at all levels. Various religious changes also took place. Reforms. For example, the Reformation in Europe would have been unthinkable without the possibility of mass distribution of the Bible in different languages and Protestant texts, which allowed everyone to independently study the sacred scriptures. With this invention, scientists could exchange discoveries more quickly, publish their works, standardize scientific terms, and base their knowledge on the works of their predecessors without fear of distortion. And philosophical, political, and social ideas spread much faster and more widely, which contributed to the development of the Enlightenment and subsequent political and social revolutions. Printed texts also helped to consolidate the rules of grammar and spelling, contributing to the formation and development of national literary languages. And finally, knowledge was no longer limited to the elite or the clergy, which opened the way to a more informed and educated society. Ultimately, the printed book became the engine of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, playing a central role in shaping the modern world. This invention allowed knowledge to not only be preserved, but also widely disseminated, which is the basis for the development of any civilization. It changed the way people learn, organize society, and interact with information, laying the foundation for all subsequent information revolutions, from newspapers to digital platforms. You may ask, were those all the inventions? No, because we are moving on to the next one, which was porcelain. Porcelain is a very beautiful type of ceramic, known for its exceptional whiteness, the fact that it allows light to pass through, especially when thin, its strength, hardness, water resistance, the ability to make a beautiful ringing sound when knocked on, and its high resistance to acids and alkalis. It revolutionized the production of tableware, art objects, luxury goods, and even some building and industrial materials. For centuries, Chinese porcelain was one of the most desirable, valuable, and expensive goods in the world. It was even called white gold. It is known that the Chinese began making porcelain as early as the Eastern Han Dynasty, although the early examples were cruder and less refined than the high-quality porcelain we know today. It was a long and gradual process of development based on a deep knowledge of clay composition, minerals, glazes, and firing techniques. Kaolin gives the products a characteristic white color and allows them to withstand very high temperatures without deformation. In addition to kaolin, the porcelain mass usually includes feldspar and quartz, which give porcelain its unique properties, namely strength, translucency, and hardness. By the Tang Dynasty, Chinese porcelain had reached a high level of quality, and it became an important commodity for export, known as white gold. Porcelain tableware became a symbol of wealth and high status, not only in China but also in other Asian countries. But the golden age of Chinese porcelain, the period of its greatest perfection and diversity, also came in the following dynasties. For example, in the Yusong dynasty, this period is considered the heyday of single-color porcelain, which was distinguished by its graceful forms, simplicity, and deep, rich glazes. We know such types as celadon, with its greenish shades similar to jade, porcelain of the Zhou type, very rare and valuable, with a delicate bluish-green glaze, Gay and Ding. It was also passed on to the Yuan dynasty. During this period, the most recognizable trend in Chinese porcelain appeared, the famous blue and white porcelain. The use of cobalt pigment, which was brought from Persia at that time, it was called Muslim blue, applied under a transparent glaze, made it possible to create bright blue patterns that did not fade at high firing temperatures. This was a truly revolutionary breakthrough, opening up new possibilities for decoration. And another dynasty was the Ming. At that time, the improvement of blue and white porcelain was actively continued, and multicolor painting developed, such as wukai, translated as 5 colors, where in addition to blue, paints applied over the glaze were used, red, green, yellow, and black. It was during the Ming dynasty that the classic image of Chinese porcelain was formed, which is still a model, and the city of Jingdezhen became the world center of porcelain production. It is worth saying that Chinese porcelain was one of the most valuable and sought-after goods exported along the Great Silk Road and sea trade routes. It became a symbol of luxury, wealth, and high status in the countries of Asia, the Middle East, and especially in Europe. The demand for Chinese porcelain was huge, and it was often used as diplomatic gifts between rulers. Europeans were absolutely fascinated by the beauty, delicacy, durability, and the fact that Chinese porcelain let in light. They could not unravel the secret of its production for many centuries, which gave rise to many myths and legends about the miracle material. It is known that porcelain changed not only the appearance, but also the convenience of dishes. It was much more hygienic, durable, and resistant to high temperatures compared to other ceramics, wooden or metal dishes, which was especially important in conditions where sanitation was at a low level. Today, porcelain is used in a variety of areas, from household utensils, dinnerware, and decorative items, to high-tech materials in industry and medicine. Its unique properties make it indispensable as insulators due to its excellent properties of not conducting electricity and resistance to high temperatures. For the production of dental prostheses, laboratory glassware resistant to chemicals and high temperatures. It is also very important for the production of acid-proof tableware and equipment. And in the form of high-quality ceramic tiles, sanitary ware such as sinks, toilets, and wall coverings. This invention has become a shining example of how art, craftsmanship, and deep knowledge of materials can have a global impact on daily life, economics, cultural exchange, and technological progress, demonstrating the outstanding ability of the Chinese people to come up with new ideas and their influence on world civilization. Well, we move on to the latest invention, namely the seismograph. It showed the outstanding scientific thinking of the Chinese, their deep understanding of natural phenomena, advanced engineering skills, and their desire to protect their population from devastating natural disasters. Unlike many other civilizations, where earthquakes were often considered the wrath of the gods or mysterious phenomena, in China they approached them scientifically, trying to understand, measure, and predict these natural disasters. This was very important, since China is located in an area where earthquakes are common. The world's first seismograph was invented by the Chinese scientist genius, astronomer, mathematician, geographer, engineer, and inventor Zhang Heng in 132 AD. It was during the Eastern Han Dynasty. The principle of the seismograph was based on inertia, the property of a body to maintain its state of rest or motion, and a complex system of internal mechanisms. Inside the hollow urn was a very well-balanced pendulum, or, according to some versions, a complex system of weights, or an inverted pendulum, which was extremely sensitive to the slightest vibrations of the earth. When an earthquake occurred, even at a considerable distance from the device, the inertia of the pendulum caused it to shift. This movement, in turn, set in motion one of the most complex lever mechanisms, which was connected to a specific dragon corresponding to the direction of the seismic wave. This mechanism caused the mouth of the desired dragon to open, and a bronze ball would fall into the mouth of a toad, producing a characteristic sound. The location of the toad into whose mouth the ball fell indicated the direction from which the earthquake came. For example, if the ball fell from a dragon facing west, it meant that the earthquake had occurred somewhere west of the seismograph installation site, and the force of the shock was sufficient to trigger the mechanism. It can be said that Zhang Heng's seismograph was an incredible achievement of ancient engineering and scientific thinking. It had amazing sensitivity. The device could detect an earthquake that was not felt by people at the place of installation, for example, in the capital, which made it possible to know about a natural disaster in advance and prepare for possible consequences, especially for remote areas where the tremors were stronger. It was this invention that demonstrated not only the engineering talent of the Chinese, but also their scientific approach to natural phenomena. They did not simply record earthquakes, but also tried to measure them, determine their direction, and use this information for real purposes. Although the exact drawings and details of the internal mechanism of Zhang Heng's seismograph were lost over time, and modern seismographs operate on completely different principles, using electronic sensors, pendulums on springs, and digital data recording, it became the first known device in history for measuring earthquakes and showed the very idea that such phenomena can be monitored, analyzed, and used for warning. Indeed, the invention of the seismograph was a very important step in the development of seismology, the science of earthquakes. It emphasized the importance of early warning of natural disasters, which is very important for reducing the number of victims, destruction, and economic losses. In the modern world, earthquake early warning systems based on networks of very sensitive seismographs around the world save thousands of lives. These systems allow you to activate security measures in time. For example, automatically stop trains and subways, turn off the gas and electricity supply, alert people via text messages or loudspeakers, giving them valuable seconds or minutes to evacuate, seek shelter, or take other safety measures, and trigger automatic emergency response systems. Thus, the ancient Chinese idea of measuring earthquakes, pioneered by Zhang Heng, underlies all modern earthquake science and warning systems, helping us understand and monitor the Earth's movements and protect people from its destructive force. This invention was a clear demonstration of the ancient Chinese desire to scientifically understand the world and apply knowledge for the benefit of society. I would like to point out that the 6 inventions of ancient China that we have considered, paper, compass, gunpowder, printing, porcelain, and seismograph, are only a small part of the vast and diverse scientific and technological heritage of Chinese civilization. Each of these discoveries demonstrates the unique talent of engineers, deep scientific curiosity, outstanding abilities for observation and analysis, as well as the practical ingenuity of the ancient Chinese, who sought to improve life, ensure safety, and expand their knowledge of the world. Not only did these inventions greatly influence the development of China itself, ensuring its leading position in the world for many centuries through technological superiority, but they also spread throughout the world through trade and cultural exchange, causing global changes. But the contribution of ancient China to world civilization cannot be overstated. These inventions became the building blocks on which many subsequent technological breakthroughs and scientific discoveries in other parts of the world were built. They are a powerful example of how new ideas from one culture can have universal significance and change all of human society, shaping the world we live in today. Ultimately, the history of China is a powerful reminder of how important scientific exploration, ingenuity, and knowledge sharing are to the progress of civilization.